you. Thanks so much. I'm truly flattered and honored. Thank you so much. President Williams, you're a Hoosier, and those basketball teams from Muncie we could never beat. You were a winner from the beginning. I'm so happy to be here. When George Wiedewelt extended this most gracious invitation to be with you today, he asked me to reflect for a few minutes on lessons that I'd learned during my lifetime about education, regionalism, leadership. George said I should, quote, ruminate. He likely wasn't forewarned the dangers of asking an old editorial writer if he had any opinions and giving him a bully pulpit to voice them from. You may well ask what credentials I have for talking about education. The simple answer is that I only share the same concerns as I think everyone in this room must have in our collective recognition that our very way of life depends on good schools. I have 8 grandchildren, 7 of whom are school age, 1 pretty soon. My wife and I pray every day that they're building a solid educational foundation. We have 2 daughters. One is a high school principal. The other teaches elementary-age children. My wife has served as university trustee and has edited a book on education in a free society. My first reporting job out of college was covering education, and I spent 1 semester teaching a college class, and I learned in the process just what a tough job teaching is. So I trust that you can see that education is an interest that is never abated in our family. In that initial reporting assignment with my hometown newspaper back in Indiana, I got to know the local superintendent of schools. He would often complain to me that society was dumping all of its social problems on the doorstep of the schoolhouse. Educators, he said, were being expected to fix what others couldn't, even though this unwelcome intrusion got in the way and radically changed their number 1 job, which was to educate children. Now, if such was the situation in the long ago post-war America of the 1950s, imagine what more has been loaded onto the schools since then. Over the past half-century, the nation's overburdened educators have been forced to confront the consequences of busing, drugs, guns, bullies, immigrants who speak no English, gang violence, fatherless families, abject poverty, sexting, and on and on and on. In effect, schools have come to serve as a mirror of the grave problems afflicting American society, especially the problems of families. But it is from schools that we keep demanding a magic fix to these problems, while at the same time lamenting declining test scores and eroding achievement in the nation's classrooms. And this is from the big cities to the small towns, from the rich district to the impoverished ones. A new documentary on the state of education, which was entitled Waiting for Superman, has recently created a heated controversy. In a way, it seems we've all been waiting for a long time for that Superman to fix the obvious crisis besetting education, but I'm afraid we'll continue to wait because finally it's apparent that there is no Superman who will come. I'm reminded of Walt Kelly's famous Pogo comic strip and that unforgettable panel that has Pogo examining his navel with a magnifying glass while proclaiming, you know what he said, "We have met the enemy and he is us." My friend and mentor, the late Brad Butler, one-time chairman of Procter & Gamble, had a favorite story he never tired of telling, and I never tire of telling it. It seems when the settlers of this new land moved westward across the vast prairie in their wagon trains, At regular intervals, they would come upon makeshift lean-to shelters. There they could stop for the night. They would find a wood box full of logs ready to fuel their cooking and to keep them warm as they prepared to bed down in safety before pushing out in the morning's dawn. There was only one rule governing this wilderness system. The wood box that they found full when they arrived had to be replenished before they left. So too with us, Brad would say. He was the proud product of Baltimore public schools, and he spent his adult life working in reforming education. Just like the pioneers, he would say, when we went to school, we found wonderfully full wood boxes. And now that we're adults, enjoying the fruits of that education, it's up to us, not the other guy, to make sure that we refill the wood boxes before we pass from the scene. Given the educational landscape we face, we surely should no more engage in that favorite national game of fixing blame on someone else, although this is a carousel whose music never seems to end. Just consider how, especially in recent days, members of the teaching profession have become the whipping boys and girls of swirling political debates in our legislatures over budgets, union contracts, last in, first out hiring practices, and on and on. In too many quarters, teacher bashing has become the sport of choice. I've always thought that it was a deadly accurate indicator of how a society truly values education by how it treats its teachers. I dare say I could go around this room today and hear heartrending stories about any number of unforgettable teachers who made the crucial difference in your lives. To be sure, we all have our favorite Mr. or Miss Chips. Yet, if this is indeed the case, and I think that it is, why are teachers now collectively lumped into a political debate that demeans their high calling? Why are they being derided in some quarters as glorified babysitters? Something's cockeyed here. Yes, improvements are needed in the teaching profession. I think we can all agree. But there's no dearth of ideas for tackling the problems of inadequate teacher compensation, struggling credentialing requirements, suffocating bureaucratic supervision, and the linkage between teaching and academic performance. The ideas are out there. Many of them make sense, and perhaps it's the time, in this time of hard choices, the problems in the educational establishment can be addressed, and those who can address them would be more willing in these times than in the past to give the fresh approaches a chance. You've heard it said that the teaching profession no longer attracts the best and brightest. Well, for the last several years, I've been watching a project called Teach for America. It was founded by a young woman named Wendy Kopp from the Ivy Leagues. In 1989, she decided that rather than enter the Wall Street rat race, she'd do something about putting motivated young teachers in difficult-to-staff school districts in areas of urban and rural poverty. The first year, she found a group of 500 fresh graduates willing to take the risk. Today, 2 decades later, Teach for America will select 5,300 eager applicants from a field of 48,000 college graduates who want to get involved. 16% of Princeton's graduating class has applied, joining 18% from Harvard. Of the project's 20,000 alumni, 2/3 continue to work full-time in education beyond their first initial 2-year commitment. They've broken through the barriers of licensing and peer resistance in 29 states, and it's unanimously agreed that they're making a difference. Schools in the poverty-stricken mountains of eastern Kentucky will receive that state's first influx of 90 of these young teachers this coming year. They aren't yet welcomed in Ohio because of licensing requirements and a suspicious educational establishment. But there is a bill now working its way through the state legislature in hopes of changing this. Obviously, all of us have a stake in this game. Members of this audience in particular recognize the vital link between education and the economy, from which we derive so much of our security and well-being. Years of research have repeatedly demonstrated that raising educational outcomes not only boosts individuals, but also has a compounding effect on the local, the state, and the federal economy. So in these hard times, it seems perfectly obvious that we must view educational reform as a key strategy for strengthening the economy. Without question, we live in a knowledge-based economy, one in which an ever greater premium is placed on the need for a well-educated population. Yet we're told by the Alliance for Excellent Education that across this land of ours, more than 7,000 students become dropouts every school day. In light of this staggering statistics, it's nonetheless comforting, I find, to acknowledge the progress being made in the Cincinnati Public Schools in their battle against dropouts. Today, more than 80% of the high school graduation of high school graduates of high school population are graduating, and that's versus only 50% a decade ago. That's obviously a huge first step. But such performance, however encouraging, only begs a larger question. Just how well equipped are today's graduates to cope with an ever more complicated, challenging world? There is much evidence to suggest that the typical K through 12 curriculum in too many U.S. schools is watered down compared to former years, or is so single-track as to produce graduates with narrow, pinched backgrounds and without the broad base of knowledge they need to live productive lives in today's world. Yes, it's nice to point to a language school or a technology school or a performing arts school, but on what sort of broader foundation are these skills being built? Where is the knowledge of history, economics, science, English grammar and literature, and the other bedrock liberal arts that the citizens of a democratic society must possess in order to exercise civic responsibility, to live moral lives, and to be competitive players in a global economy? Scores from the 2009 National Assessment of Educational Progress paint a dismal picture of the consequences of a myopic curriculum, or of putting so much emphasis in teaching one subject for test purposes that others are neglected. The results of this national examination recently revealed that fewer than 1/3 of this country's elementary and high school students have a solid grasp of science. Thus, it should come as no surprise that an international test administered at the same time to measure scientific knowledge showed that American youngsters were trailing their counterparts from many European and Asian countries. Obviously, these results should trigger much anxiety about America's once vaunted competitiveness in science and technology. I hope we all recognize that it doesn't have to be this way. We have to look no further than today's gathering to see that what can be done to arm better our youngsters for the world they'll face. We're here to celebrate the missions of the Economics Center, which has been at the forefront for many years under George Riedevelt's leadership in providing quality economic and financial education to students and teachers in K through 12 classrooms, including 48 school districts of southwestern Ohio. And since its founding in 1977, as you heard earlier, more than 40,000 teachers have been trained, and they in turn have reached more than 1 million students. Now that's effectiveness, and it's no surprise for us to hear today that among the 200 such programs in the country, college-based, UC's is number one. Especially now, in the turmoil of the times, we need these reminders that things can be better with vision and leadership. And for 34 years, George and his colleagues have provided that leadership. In light of the educational picture I've tried to examine, however superficially in the past few minutes, I do want to tackle the assignment that George additionally gave me. What lessons, he wanted to know, has this ancient mariner gleaned in watching all these issues unfold for more than a half century? Feeling very old. Well, I think lesson number one is that education is everybody's business. It's far too vital for our futures and those of our children and grandchildren to leave to the professionals and to the politicians. Especially must more of a voice and more of a choice be given to parents, particularly those locked in poverty settings, those who are willing to cast their fate even in lotteries in order to select schools they desperately want for their children to attend. In this regard, I have great faith that Mama knows best, and she needs to be heard, and let her vote with her feet. By that I mean, let her send her child to the school she chooses. Lesson number two. We know from political and business life that monopolies never work. They stifle the creative spirit that advances life. Now, while 90% of the students in America attend public schools, there needs to be plenty of room under the educational umbrella for anyone who wishes to join from the private, the parochial, the for-profit, and the homeschool sectors as well. No one group, no one system, no one approach offers all the answers. In our classrooms, as in our economies, let's let the entrepreneurial spirit flower. I realize it may be anathema to some in this audience to hear me say that I believe such innovations as need-based vouchers and non-public charter schools fit this category. Maybe not all voucher systems work, and not all charter schools are better than their public counterparts, but there's mounting evidence to support expanding their reach. We need to acknowledge such evidence, not use political muscle to snuff out the validity of it. There's a network of charter schools founded by two young teachers called KIP, Knowledge is Power program. A decade ago, they started their first school, Ujima Academy, and it happened to be in Baltimore, where Brad Butler grew up. The test scores of the 5th through 8th graders who study there now rank among the highest in all of the state of Maryland. Although 4 out of 5 of the 370 students come from pretty desperate poverty-level families, 85% of them will eventually go on to college. Well, despite this stellar record, it took an 11th hour agreement with the teachers union last month to keep the academy from shutting down. The school is built on the theory that if children spend more time with their teachers, they'll do better. So this KIP school starts at 7:30 a.m. and runs to 5 p.m. and includes weekend and summer classes. The teachers, who now earn the highest pay among any Baltimore teachers, were quite willing to accept the added burden of time it placed on them, but the union resisted, saying their hourly wage wasn't high enough. Although an agreement was finally reached, isn't this an example which is all too frequent in the school world of threatening to throw the baby out with the bathwater? Lesson number 3. Resist the perceived wisdom. As that old song proclaimed, it ain't necessarily so. For example, why not break the stranglehold on teacher credentialing so that early retirees from business, engineering, the sciences, and other professions can more easily enter the classroom and give children the benefits of their life experiences? The favorite teacher of some of our older grandchildren is a one-time store owner with a love of history who now passes on to his students his own vibrant enthusiasm for this nation's heritage. Back in the dark ages, when I was covering the Indiana legislature, That year's big issue involved a hot political debate over what to teach versus how to teach. And it was pointed out during that argument that teaching had become such a closed shop that Albert Einstein couldn't meet the qualifications for teaching mathematics in an Indiana classroom. Lesson number 4, Dusty Baker's right. Small ball is the way to win, not waiting on those home runs that are so few and far between. Solutions to this country's educational crisis will not come from Washington, or for that matter, from the bureaucrats who inhabit the state capitals. They're going to be found on the local level among those dedicated to helping their communities and who are willing to put their ideas at risk in the classroom. And you've seen some examples of that today from the young teachers who were honored. Once again, I think the Economic Center, which has had years of success playing small ball, stands as a shining example. Dusty would be proud of you, George. But you will rightly argue, Washington and Columbus hold the purse strings, and often they use that leverage to tie local districts in knots. This may be true, but it's also true that grassroots political pressure, rightly applied, can sometimes achieve very improbable results. An aroused group of parents, as you all know, can be a fearsome force for beneficial change. Finally, lesson number 5. If you wait long enough, good things happen. As some of you heard and may recall, several of us, including my friend Bill Butler, created something called the Metropolitan Growth Alliance. We hope to bridge that big wide river out there and create a sense of regional unity within our 3-state, 14-county metropolitan area. We planted some seeds, but we're disappointed that not many of them sprouted. But until now, perhaps you've heard about the Strive Together partnership that is focused on helping youngsters in Cincinnati, Covington, and Newport achieve success from what they call cradle to career. The effort's a partnership made up of early childhood educators and school superintendents from both sides of the river, of business leaders, college presidents, and an assortment of others from throughout the region. They put away their geographical hang-ups, and judging from the data, which is measuring progress at every level of education, the project is producing real results, so much so that the framework of it is now spreading nationwide. Well, believe me, Bill Butler, it's thrilling to behold a regional success story, especially one that holds such promise for the future of these young people. And it's not alone. There's another organization growing out of Vision 2015 in Northern Kentucky called the Northern Kentucky Education Council that is a public-private partnership and another great example of what a regional approach can do to solve these terrible problems. I think it's interesting but hardly surprising that much of the innovative thinking that we have mentioned today has come about during and likely because of the recent economic hard times. The Great Recession, as some are calling it, has forced us, as nothing has in my adult lifetime, to examine our bedrock civic values and to ask hard questions about whether we can afford to continue doing things the way we'd come to take for granted, or is there a better way? The ensuing debate has obviously been painful in assigning necessary priorities and costing many jobs. The entrenched status quo doesn't surrender easily. But amid the dire projections we hear, I somehow have reason for hope. It was during the Great Depression in the 1930s that some of the highest levels of student achievement ever recorded on the Iowa Basic Test. That's the granddaddy of all educational testing. This, despite unwieldy class sizes, high student-teacher ratios, and other bare-bones conditions that we would find unacceptable today. But families and communities understood with a remarkable clarity that education was the one investment they could make that would promise a brighter future for their children. Perhaps today's climate of scarcer resources is producing the same clarity that will enable us to revive an educational system that limped badly through the boom times. Perhaps it will allow us to surmount the ideological and political barriers that have divided us, and to see that all that really counts are our children and our grandchildren. For after all, we stand responsible to them. Now, George, the trouble with ruminations is that they can last too long, so I'm happy to inform you that this one has come to an end. Thank you very much.